venture seller finance. So in that particular case, that means that the owner of the current business, while everybody hopes somebody will write them and stroke them a check, there's going to be some financing or some paper that they will take on. And then approximately 50% of small businesses are done with little or no buyer cash. I think that tends to get towards more of the unprofitable firms, but just keep in mind that if you decide to purchase a business to start, you have other financing options beyond what we will talk about today. Let's see, starting from scratch. This is what most of you are here for, and the advantages are obvious. This is your vision, your brand, and you might be right about it. If you're successful at starting a small business, it is perhaps the most significant wealth building idea that's ever been cornered. The vast majority of people who are wealthy in our society have done so through small business or large business ownership, scaling a small business to a larger size. And of course, you get your own initial decision making. Almost always, if you grow a business into a full-time venture, you will be dealing with other people. So I don't want to overstate the significance of being your own boss, but it does allow you to create your own vision and to set a path that you are interested in. The advantages are obvious. There's a significant risk to starting your own business because there's a high failure rate. I also don't like to overstate this. It's a lot of failure in the small business annals, but when you really study the number of small businesses created in this country, most fail without a significant loss of personal resources. I often tell people I wish I had known more about entrepreneurialisms when I was young, when I had more income producing years to take a risk. But that's a real issue in terms of lacking a paycheck and all of those sort of things as you begin to decide to put in place a full-time venture. And there's no way around it. The whole world is talking about the importance of time and all of those sort of things to all of us for things other than our day-to-day jobs. But I would be kidding you if I would tell you small business ownership doesn't usually require a significant amount of time and effort. So you really have to make some sacrifices, I think, with regard to the rest of your life to get a small business off the ground. Some of you may be interested in just a part-time venture. Once again, the advantage of a part-time venture, and for me, a part-time venture is where you're going to keep a current job, but also do something on the side. There's a whole business called solopreneurship that has developed around this concept. It used to be called simply self-employment. There's nothing wrong with it. This is your vision, your brand. It is generally not as wealth building as starting your own business, but it does offer the potential to augment your income. It does allow you your own decision making. Often solo entrepreneurs are functioning with a network and are operating a business with a minimal number of employees. So it really is your vision. There is a risk of failure. And then the one thing I always warn the folks in the audience about a part-time venture is that a business that is part-time may only be capable of part-time commercial viability. So if you're considering this option and you're considering growing it, always keep your eye as to whether or not you're just dealing with a small part-time market as opposed to something that can be scaled. That happens from time to time. And then, of course, as with owning your own business, the trouble is if you are trying to keep a job and trying to run a part-time venture, time considerations have to be worked in. Time management is usually fathomable, but something that you need to take into account. If there are inventors in the room, it's been my experience over the years that inventors are best at creating things. It's what they do best. It's what they really enjoy. And day-to-day management of an enterprise may not be their thing. Often what inventors can do and what the history of inventions is that most people make money by delegating the running of the enterprise to someone else who can do that. There are substantial risk to this. One, it is unlikely that if you search for someone to run an enterprise once you have conceived and perhaps put a prototype in place for an idea, you will have to give up substantial ownership. Often many inventors are reluctant to be able to do that, but it's worthy of your consideration if you do the research on the success of licensing versus running your own enterprise. And even as an inventor, you will have substantial startup costs because generally you will have to get your idea to a prototype development that can be displayed. You'll want to protect it with intellectual property, trademarks, or patents if that's appropriate. And generally that will involve you with legal expenses. Over the years, I've never done any better than recommend most people who are considering this option, and I'm sure there are a few of them on the call today, look at LonnieJohnson.com. I actually met him 30 years ago. He is the gentleman who invented the Super Soaker squirt gun. He's actually an engineer. He was a NASA engineer. And you can go to his website, and he has developed a whole capability around licensing inventions. It's what he has done his entire life. And his initial story was he tried to start something from scratch, couldn't raise the money, found a toy company, in this case Hasbro, that took it on, paid him a royalty of somewhere around 10%. So he gave up a substantial amount of ownership. And I think his net worth is in the hundreds of millions today. And the other thing I always warn inventors is beware of the invention services firms. I tell people work with people who make money off the invention, not people who make money off the inventor. So I'm not interested in many of the services that charge upfront fees. You can always go to an attorney or something to be able to get the necessary legal guidance and things like that and pay for that. So just be wary of the invention services firms out there. There was a study by the Department of Commerce many years ago, and it actually looked at a whole bunch of inventor services firms and really could not find one example of where they had taken an entrepreneur to commercial viability. So licensing for the inventors in the room, and I always like to cover that for those that are considering that option. There are those of you who have probably at least considered or heard about franchises. Franchises have a number of elements and may be applicable to inventors. The advantage of a franchise is if it's a well-established one, you will have delivered to you a marketing and operational plan. What the SBDC and Norfolk State are doing for you over the next 10 weeks, a franchise will walk in and deliver to you in terms of a written document and a contract. It is a matter of record that established franchises have higher startup success, and they bring with them some brand recognition. And generally, they can be of some assistance with financing. They won't finance an entire deal on their own, but they can be very, very helpful in terms of finding people that will finance their deal. The disadvantages are the costs may be significant. And you should keep in mind, for those of you with a real vision of what you want to do, that a franchise is a contractual relationship and it may or may not fit your decision. There really are restrictions within that contract. You want to read those closely to make sure that they take into account. And then, of course, there are regulatory restrictions depending upon the state you set up with. And I know that we're dealing with folks from out of state from the initial introduction. So keep in mind, if you are looking at a franchise, you want to make sure that it meets the requirements in the individual state where you are seeking or considering ownership. And then finally, there's minority ownership. The concept here is to purchase a portion of a small business. And this I offer to any of you who may have current jobs. It has a number of advantages, and this is how the concept works. Let's suppose you go to work for somebody and you're a valuable employee. Your competency is growing in the firm, and that competency is something the firm wants to keep. Often management may consider letting you buy into the business and becoming an owner. It's a way of keeping you more valuable. It's a way of giving you access to two income streams, the profits of the business and all of that. And it makes you a small business owner. You may not own 50% of the business. When I say minority here, I mean owning less than 50% of the business, but it still is shared ownership. You're still likely to participate in the ongoing strategic vision of the firm. And it does open the possibility of sweat equity and all of that sort of thing. This was exposed to me about 30 years ago by a Wharton School graduate that I knew at the time and was kind enough to share the concept. I actually, in my lifetime, negotiated a 3% ownership in one of the initial firms that I was in. At the time, it required me to write a $30,000 check, but it got me a 3% ownership in a business, and it was one of the most profitable exit strategies that I ever had. So the concept here is for those of you that become employers, that become employees, may not be able to take the risk of establishing a full venture, but you develop competencies that may become so valuable to a small business owner or to a large business that they allow you to buy into the business and to purchase a minority ownership position. So purchase, building from scratch, licensing, franchises, and minority ownership considerations are the major ways that you can start. With that, I'm going to stop a minute and see, Tiffany, if we have any questions from the audience.
Questions? So far, no, we're good.
Fair enough. So then we go from, those are the ways you can start. If you choose to start, you have to get into a situation where you have, you understand the options that are available to you. Now, over the course of this activity, we're going to talk a lot about access to capital, but the idea today is to give you a broad brush of your various options. And then your individual situations will undoubtedly bring about questions that we'll answer throughout the setting. So that's the idea today, is to give you a broad brush of grants, debt, equity, and bootstrap financing that may be available to you as a small business ownership. There are four important questions you have to ask yourself whenever you start. And the most important one is, how much money will you need? Starting next week, we'll show you how to begin to calculate that, but we'll use some spreadsheets and some income statements to do that. But the use of funds is important. These top two bullet points are the first two things that any investor or any debt lender will ask you if you approach them for money. How much money do you need? And then what are you going to use the money for? Generally, for most folks, there's a broad use of money, obviously, but the use of funds falls into five categories: real estate, equipment, working capital, which is an all-purpose category of funding, lines of credit. Some of you may need to have financing, for example, to buy inventory for your products or services or things like that, or to finance receivables or wages. And then, of course, there's gap financing for those of you that might need it for construction purposes or other one-off elements. The thing I want you to do with the rest of today's presentation is recognize that there is an expectation of the money source on the other side of the equation. In other words, they want a return, and you have to have some knowledge of their expectations to be able to gauge your potential for success or to put together a team that will allow you to succeed. Five types of financing that I'll cover today. They come in many varieties, but I think this is very comprehensive. We'll talk about grants. There's debt or loans. There's equity. Equity is very important to what Akosia said at the start. For those of you that go on into the accelerator program, you'll be dealing with individual investors and considering giving up ownership. Lots of financing is really a combination of both debt and equity. And then for those who are considering part-time ventures, we'll talk about bootstrap financing near the end. Let's start with grants. The advantage of grants is it's everybody's greatest hope. If you can find it, the idea here is you don't have to pay it back, although often grants come with significant contractual commitments. The good news is there are substantial grant programs at the federal government, particularly for those of you who have a technological idea. Often, from time to time, there are local departments of economic development who put out small grant programs. These programs are small. Generally, I've not seen anything outside the range of $5,000 to $40,000 in the past 2 or 3 years, but that may be enough for some of you. For those of you with larger aspirations, it will only help with a small part of the need. And then, of course, there's the ability for nonprofits to realize that you can approach a whole world of nonprofits and foundations about raising money. So those of you with a nonprofit idea, fundraising will become a complete part of your whole management team, and you will have access to folks who only lend to nonprofits. The bad news that I always have to give people is that grants that provide working capital are very rare. Working capital being, I want to be able to use this for any and all purposes, wages, office supplies, any of those things. Generally, grants come with a very, very specific guidance on what you can use the money for, and grants for pure working capital are pretty rare. Then generally grants have to align with the business needs that fulfill government contract purposes. The major sources for those of you who are interested in who have technology ideas, the Small Business Innovation Research Grant or the SBIR STTR program is the major grant program that is available. These are federal governmental agencies. They are searching for new and novel ideas. And generally, if you can find one that aligns with your technological concept, they will help you finance its growth or finance its use into something that they need done. So often the combination of being able to find an SBIR program that has a need for your technology will allow you to expand your technology and test it while under the auspices of fulfilling a government grant and using their money. Every cabinet level agencies at the federal government has a SBIR program. So whether you're in agriculture or all the way up to cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, if you're that far along in your considerations for technology, there is a federal government agency that may be interested and it is worth your look. In the state of Virginia, there is an economic development organization called the Center for Innovative Technology. They're rebranding. They call themselves the Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation now. They just did that a couple months ago. But that is a state agency that is interested in firms that are in Virginia and may consider a grant program. They also have some equity financing programs as well. From time to time, local governments will consider matching programs. You probably all in your reading seen that there are incentives and awards given to firms who are relocating to Hampton Roads. I always tell people, just as Akosia said at the start, wherever you intend to set up your business, that locality, that county, or that city, you want to become intimately familiar with the local Department of Economic Development. That's where you'll find these options, and they will only be interested in the businesses located within that locale, because obviously they're using the taxpayer money of the folks in that county or city. But wherever you locate your business, make sure you become aware of the local Department of Economic Development. They, from time to time, will hatch these programs, and it's a constantly evolving type of activity. For all purpose looks, you can look at grants.gov at the federal level. There is a subscription service that's quite good, but it's a little costly, called Grant bankingwatch.com. For those of you considering nonprofit efforts, you will probably look into this. And of course, you can always use the local library where you can find the Community Development Foundation. Hampton Roads has one, for example, and their funding directories online. That's grants. Debt. Debt is a loan, okay? And the key here is making sure that you can find a way to qualify for the underwriting criteria. And then, of course, you want to be able to pay it back. So I'm going to explain to you in the next couple of slides the typical underwriting requirements you will face by dealing with a debt lender. There are three types of debt lenders: banks, commercial banks we all know about, government loan programs like the Small Business Administration, and then there are non-bank lenders. We all probably intuitively know that there are lots of firms out there like insurance companies or things like that that do do lending, but they don't have a location on every corner like likes of our local banks do. So I'm going to cover those three areas, and you'll see the level of risk they begin to take as you move up that. For best practices, for those of you that are considering starting a business, you, I think, want to start a banking relationship with one of the banks that gives you access to the government loan programs, principally the Small Business Administration. Not all banks do that. So it is worth asking up front before you establish the banking relationship for your firm that they also do SBA loans, because you'll see in a minute the government will take a little bit more risk than the typical commercial bank will. I don't really have any problem with online or fintech yet, although I will avoid upfront fees. And I want to expose you to the world of non-bank government loan lenders as an option. I want you to be aware of these options and know the cost of money, because that will allow us to calculate the debt service and your ability to afford whatever the debt service is for an individual loan. These are the criteria. Many of you who may have seen a course or had a banker do a presentation will be familiar with what they call the 5 C's of credit. I don't use the C words. I use the 5 words down there in the left-hand column. If you are going to qualify for a bank, you will have to meet these underwriting criteria. Generally, the first criteria is management. It's the most important. It's the most important for any lender or investor. And you prove your management capability as a startup by walking in with a loan package and a business plan. The second, and equally important to management, is you're going to have to show them some projections that can show you repay the amount of debt service that is required for the loan amount that you're asking for. So repayability is the most critical element. I think actually it's what most loan officers worry about best, but obviously they won't trust repayability if they don't believe in your management capabilities. Credit is a credit check. They will run those. They do those for all programs. There are various levels of credit score that may or may not be applicable. Then the tough two, equity and collateral. Equity is also called capacity. Generally, equity means that a loan officer that is going to enter into a debt agreement with you wants to know that you have skin in the game. And so they apply many things, but they apply a debt to equity standard to make sure that you are at risk if they're taking a risk. For most banks, that standard is 2 to 1. So if you want to borrow $100,000, they'd like to know that you have $40,000 or $50,000 of your own money to invest in the venture. Government loan programs, as you can see, take the next level of risk. They will lend at a 4 to 6 to 1 debt to equity ratio. So same scenario. If you need to raise $100,000, generally an SBA program will give you consideration if you have $20,000 to $30,000 to invest. Non-bank lenders will take considerably more risk than that. But you'll see down here in the bottom at the bottom that the way they compensate for the risk is they raise your interest rate. So now we're back to repayability to make sure that the interest rate is not too high for you to afford the debt service. And then the fifth criteria is collateral. Collateral is the bane of all small business owners from my perspective. Collateral is the secondary source of repayment for the loan. So as a startup walking into a loan officer, you will walk in, you will be prepared, and you will meet these initial criteria, but you will face a final question that says, what happens if the business doesn't work out? How do we still get repaid? And generally, banks are looking for a secondary source of repayment in order to be able to know that they will be repaid if the business doesn't work out. A terrible question to ask an entrepreneur, I know, but it is one you will face in looking at bankers. Then down here in the black, you can see the cost of money. Generally, if you can qualify for bank financing, it will be the lowest cost of money for you. Generally, if banks will lend you the money, they will lend you the money at 0.5 point to 2 points over prime. So a loan agreement is always quoted with prime plus something. So you would have to know the prime rate, and then you could add 0.5 point to 2 points over prime to estimate what your debt service would be on the loan. Government loan programs lend at 2 to 2.75 points over prime. So you can see they take more risk. They charge you slightly more for the money. And generally, that amount of money is affordable. Once again, we'll run cash flow statements and things like that to be able to demonstrate repayability. And then the non-bank lenders, we start getting into some of the high interest lenders. 3 to 7 points above prime is a good catch for insurance companies and all the variable lenders out there that are in the non-banking sector that are non-depository institutions. So you can see non-bank lenders will take more risk, but they will charge you a significantly higher interest rate. That may or may not be bad. The real question is we run our cash flow statements and determine whether or not you can afford the debt service, because access to the funding may be more important. And obviously, if you can qualify for a bank or a government loan program, you would take that ahead of a non-bank lender. That's debt. Let's see. The banks and sources. Banks, as I told you, are generally the low-cost alternative. Government loan programs. Here's how the government loan programs, by and large, work. Most of them work by entering through a bank or a financial institution that will do the loan. And then if the government approves your loan, they issue a guarantee to the bank, and the bank dispenses the money. An exception to that has been the COVID programs over the past couple of years, which were direct loans from the federal government. All of those have ended as of just about a month or two ago. So those are no longer available at this time unless Congress went through another appropriation. And I can assure you that Norfolk State and the SBDC would notify you of that because they would tell us that lots of calls were coming if that happens. The dominant government loan programs are the Small Business Administration. For those of you in rural counties, the Department of Agriculture and other federal agencies. The 7A program under the SBA is the all-purpose working capital program. It can lend anywhere from $2 to $5 million. If we have any folks in the room who are considering purchasing real estate from the start, the SBA has a 504 program, which is a really great deal, but it only does real estate and equipment financing. It won't do working capital. And then they have an SBA Express program and an export finance program. I always like to make note of that just in case we have an exporter in the room. In the state of Virginia, the Virginia Small Business Financing Authority is the state program. You can lock into their site. They have microloans, they have some child care programs, and they have some general working capital loans that are applicable as well. And as I said earlier, always keep in mind wherever you decide to locate your business about the local departments of economic development, because they have loan programs from time to time, and it's an evolving element. They will change on a year-to-year basis as they get funds or they undertake new entrepreneurial initiatives. Those are your principal sources. And then the non-banking sources, leasing firms are the obvious ones for those of you that may need vehicles or equipment. For those of you that are considering doing business with the government, I would acquaint yourself with the account receivable financing of organizations. These are also called factoring firms. They actually buy receivables. It can be very helpful in financing your cash flow. There are, of course, plenty of folks who do real estate financing across the board, even outside of the banks. And the non-banking sector is full of firms that do asset-based financing. Generally, you access the non-bank financing area by finding a broker. We have two very good ones in the Hampton Roads region. You access through a broker who has access to a multiple type of financing programs. My experience is you can sit down and have a conversation with them about what you're trying to do, and they'll let you know whether they have any resources that are applicable. I don't have any problem with internet searches for these kinds of resources too, but beware of folks who charge you upfront fees for business plans and all of that sort of thing. Generally, the best lenders and best brokers that we've encountered at the SBDC over the years will have a conversation with you. They will tell you whether or not they can help. And if they can, they will move you through a process to be able to find the financing. So just be wary of upfront fees for non-bank and fintech sources. The internet is loaded with those, and we've just never seen much good out of that at the SBDC. Once we leave debt, we get to equity. Now, we've crossed a transom here. Equity suddenly means that you are going to give up ownership in your firm. We pay investors or venture capital firms or similar type of equity folks through profits. The advantage of equity is someone takes an ownership position in your firm, and they are usually not paid right away. They are interested in the growth of your firm, the significant growth of your firm, and being paid out at some time in the future when you sell the firm or when the firm gets large enough to begin repaying the equity investment. The advantage of this to the investors is that if I give you $100,000 and I own 20% of your business and you are successful, when you pay out profits, I get 20% of that upside. If you are a growing small business, there is theoretically no upside to the potential value of your firm to me. Obviously, everything has a ceiling, but you can see the value of ownership is that it can produce upside, whereas a debt lender will only get repaid the debt service that you negotiate for the money lenders. Owners get paid in a variety of ways. Exit strategies, if you sell the firm, if you buy them out, you can obviously talk with your accountants and things like that about strategies, about repaying from dividends and those kinds of things. That gets into heavy tax considerations and is not part of this course. Generally, your business model and your return on investment must be substantial to attract equity financing. So for those of you in the room, I generally counsel that you need a business that has the potential for a 15 to 20% return to the investor in order to attract it. That's because below 15 or 20%, there are less risky places than investing in a small business or in a small business startup that most investors can put their money, and they will if the return is not substantial enough. Generally, best practices, you want to raise enough equity to leverage debt options. This means you give up less ownership. Almost always when you start seeking equity financing, we're dealing with a management team. Most inventors want to know that there is the CEO with the vision, someone to mind the money, the CFO, a good marketing and operations elements. Generally, they invest in management teams. There's a saying out there in the equity world that says investors will invest in a first-rate management team with a second-rate idea rather than a first-rate idea with a second-rate management team. That's the importance of team when you start raising equity financing. And that would be important in the accelerator program that Akosia was talking about earlier. Generally, in order to get this type of rate of return, it's helpful to have a barrier to entry to your business or an intellectual property protection, a trademark strategy or a patent or something along those lines, or a trade secret that allows you to grow and keep the competition at bay for some time. And then I always counsel people who start looking at equity options. It's one thing to raise the money. It's another thing to remember that everything works best when everybody makes money. So once you bring an investor in, they are interested in your business and how you will get paid. There's an old wives' tale out there about silent partners. I've made a number of equity investments in my lifetime, and I've never been a silent partner. And I don't think that there are many investors out there who don't want not to know what's going on in the business. They're not going to write you a check and come back 3 months later. They'll be involved in the business. And that may be valuable involvement. They may bring expertise or things they know about the business that you may find helpful. Generally, when you look at equity, there are all kinds of options. But I like to use the same criteria for the debt lenders and show you what goes away. Once you consider outside investors, credit, equity, and collateral are no longer considerations. Investors are going to take a higher level of risk. So they are going to be evaluating you almost exclusively on your managerial competency and your business plan and your ability to hit milestones. Repayability is the return on investment that we talked about. So the good news is credit, equity, and collateral go away. The bad news, depending upon your personal element, is you will generally have to give up some ownership in order to attract equity financing. So if your goal in life is to build a small business and you want to own 100% of it and you don't want to have to deal with any other owners, then equity is not going to be an option for you. But for many of you who may have very large ideas, equity will be essential because you will need access to this kind of money in order to be able to grow the firm. And remember, if you're capable of growing something to a significant size, the value of a 50 to 75% ownership position can still be quite substantial as you move forward. Frankly, I've had a number of partners and been involved as a minority investor in a number of deals that have panned out very, very well. And I never owned more than 50% of the business, and in some cases owned less than 10%. So I just want to broaden your horizons about the ability to undertake and do what you want to do from a business perspective, but take into account the advantages of equity financing, particularly if you believe that you have a high growth enterprise. Equity sources span the gamut. Actually, you've got across here, family, friends, and relatives. I remember everybody told me growing up, never lend to family, friends, and relatives. I can just tell the group that's nothing could be farther from the truth. Some of the most significant investors in the country and angel investors are family, friends, and relatives. You do want to tread lightly. You do want to reduce it to a business relationship, but they are a source. Crowdsourcing is a developing area that we're studying at the SBDC. I'd be careful of it. It's very, very good for fundraising for nonprofits. When I talk about crowdsourcing here, I'm talking about actually raising money and giving away ownership stakes. And that's an area that is still developing on the internet, although there are a couple of known resources there. Private investors, they're angel and angel networks. That's what they call private investors. That's the name that's developed in entrepreneurial circles. There is a entrepreneurial network of angels in Hampton Roads called 757 Angels. And many of you may find angel networks in other parts if you're from outside of Hampton Roads. Then there are venture capital firms. Venture capital firms are really the industry creating ideas. You've heard about Silicon Valley and all of those sorts of things. Venture capital firms take a significant and will fund significant enterprises that have high growth potential. Almost always a barrier to entry or intellectual property is access. I actually had our students, Women Mary, do a scan about 3 months ago. There are a number of venture capital firms throughout the state of Virginia, and there's no reason why you cannot apply to those. Generally, venture capital firms have an interest. They specialize. Some may specialize in biology. Some may specialize in cybersecurity. Some may specialize in artificial intelligence. So you would want to do your research to make sure that your idea is consistent with what they are looking for. And then this is just the broader area: family, friends, and relatives, private investors and angel networks, and government equity programs that apply. I don't want to forget our folks in the room that have that are thinking of starting out a little smaller. This is bootstrap financing. Generally, for me and my experience working with solopreneurs at the SBDC, this is for businesses that are going to do under $40,000 a year in sales. So generally, banks and obviously investors are unlikely to be interested in something this small, but there are a series of individual sources that you might consider tapping to be able to fund a part-time venture. You can see the sources down here in the lower columns: home equity loans. Suppliers are a option. Often suppliers will extend credit to you for 30 to 90 days. And that's almost as good as a line of credit if you can turn over your product or your service in that amount of time. Customers may finance that. I actually am working with a client that came out of Norfolk State's program last November, and he's actually using customer financing to finance some of his prototype development. Credit unions and banks also do personal loans. Some of you may have some cash value life insurance laying around that you can borrow against. You can borrow against brokerage accounts, obviously. I prefer to just cash them out and use them as opposed to borrowing against them. And some of you may already have retirement funds. Retirement funds may allow you to borrow against them. And of course, I have had people who have used retirement funds, taken the money out, and then replaced the money when they only needed the money for 30 to 60 days to get their venture off so that they didn't incur tax elements. Then there are credit cards. You don't have any problem with credit cards. In the end, credit cards are little more than revolving lines of credit, but we all have to keep our eye on the interest rate here. I think the best use of credit cards is when you can use them to do things that help your venture, but that you can pay them off in 30 to 60 day timeframes so the interest rate does not get out of hand. And then there are microloan programs. Hampton Roads lacks a microloan program, but the Virginia Small Business Financing Authority has one for those of you that might consider it. So these are bootstrap financing mechanisms that are for the part-time ventures, or those of you who are starting out small and haven't made a full commitment. These are ways to be able to get small amounts of money so that you can start testing your entrepreneurial idea and servicing customer. That's bootstrap financing. So let me stop there, and Tiffany, and I'll let people ask questions about money. We're making pretty good time here, so I'm available for questions or things that may have come out from either of the first two segments.
Okay, I have two questions. Ready? The first one is, where does consulting come into play in all of this? This person is interested in learning how to build a consulting business and what needs to get done to get it started legally.
Gotcha. The real question for the consultant, I can speak to that personally, is whether you want it to be a full-time venture or a part-time activity. Let's deal with full-time first. Let's assuming that you have a current competency and a current job, and you're hopeful that your consulting business will be able to rise to a level of income that at least is equal to that and exceeds that. If that's the case, what you're going to find is you're going to find that you're going to divide your year into two parts. 50% of that is going to be marketing to find new business, and 50% of that will be servicing your current clients. It has been my experience from a pricing standpoint that a minimal hourly rate of $50 to $100 an hour is an absolute minimum for you to be able to make money full time. And it is for you to assess how much money you would need to start up. So for a consultant and for many of the small businesses in the room, I would do a projection and look at 3 months of working capital. In other words, it's going to take you 3 months to start to actively engage and market to the environment and start to find clients. And so if I was looking for the amount of money I needed in order to be able to start, I would want 3 to 6 months of working capital. 3 to 6 months is a time-tested small business entrepreneurial regimen that says it increases the chances for success for small business entrepreneurs if they have that 3 to 6 months of working capital so they can get up and running. It never quite happens as fast as you like, but 3 to 6 months gives you enough to be able to cover personal expenses, to be able to market yourself, and to be able to find clients, and then you can replenish those. For consultants, generally the bootstrap mechanisms may be enough. I've seen consultants start and use credit cards for their working capital and then get their clients up and running and then simply repay those credit cards. A small microloan in the $10,000 to $30,000 range is that. If you have aspirations beyond that and you want to grow to additional consultants, then you're into the realm of doing a full-scale business plan and determining how much money is necessary for you and the people that you bring on to work. So from a consulting standpoint, it's an excellent option for a full-time venture. For a part-time venture, it is often easier. You can simply market until you find a client, make sure it doesn't conflict with what you're doing full-time, okay? But it becomes a way to augment income. And if you go that route, I would use the bootstrap mechanisms. I would not go through the process of putting together a whole loan package to approach a debt lender or an equity financing organization. I hope that answered the question, Tiffany.
I think so. Yes.
And
All
they
right.
can come back, sure.
Sorry. Next question is, so does the equity portion mean in perpetuity, or is there a considerable difference between the two forms?
Actually, it can mean in perpetuity. Obviously, it doesn't have to. If the business is very successful, you may reach a stage where you are able to buy out the people who made the initial equity investment. You will need to remember that that will need to be negotiated. Obviously, if you start an enterprise, give up some ownership, and you are successful, and I am your investor and I'm making money with you, I may be interested in your continued success and continued to make money. Now, you may be able to negotiate with me that you want to grow to 100% ownership, but that will be a negotiation. So it is quite possible it is in perpetuity. In the end, most successful businesses will either grow to a substantial scale, or they may actually get bought at some time in the future, and all investors will be able to exit. So the answer to the question is it is to be negotiated once you have that. I would encourage the individual asking the question that if you are successfully starting a business and you have someone who gave you an equity position, who took an equity interest at the start and has helped you become successful, that there is nothing wrong with coming to talk to them and asking them and tell them you'd like to own the home business, but the amount will be negotiated. And if you're both making money, I would consider just continuing to grow the business and making it more valuable. That's another way to create wealth, as opposed to just recapturing some ownership that helped you get off from startup. That's Holleran's opinion, by the way. So make sure I answered that one to her satisfaction.
Okay. Let's see. So making an equity contract, would a standard 50% or 100% repayment be a reasonable offer?
Actually, that we would have to look at the business plan. If you are a startup, there are some standard ways of valuing startups. I know there are a couple of existing businesses in the room, and existing business can be valued. And generally, you would establish the amount of money you want to raise as a percentage of the value of your business. How much money you want to raise. Let's say your business, make it simple. Let's say your business is worth $1 million. You want to raise $100,000. And so you would send a 10% interest in the business to raise that $100,000. Those are valuations that have to be determined based either from looking at a full-scale business plan if you're a startup, or by looking at the financial documents that an existing business could produce so that the business could be valued. So there's nothing standard about 50 to 100% or something like that. Why you hear 50% is generally most people who start into small business ownership do so because they want to be their own boss. There's nothing wrong with that. And many want to own 100%. They don't want to give up any ownership. They will not consider it as an option. That's why you hear that, because they will probably get counsel saying, well, as long as they own 51% or more, and depending upon a number of other legal parameters, 51% ownership means you're the 800-pound gorilla in the room, okay? For example, in one of the businesses I was in that turned out to be quite valuable, I had a 3% ownership position with 4 other individuals who owned about 20%, but we had an individual who had sold us that 20%, who owned 80%. We called him the 800-pound gorilla in the room. In the end, when we sat down to make strategic decisions, if there was an impasse, what he said went, okay? And generally, though, it was a team orientation because he was that kind of owner. But that's why you hear the things about 50% or that. If you own theoretically 51% of a business, then you have the voting capability to hold sway. But once you're engaged with investors, or those of you considering equity investments, I would encourage you to visualize the investors as part of the team, and to include them in the decision making. That's what will work best. And often, if you can find investors who know your business or are interested in the business, they may have experience that you find very, very, very valuable. So that's how I would encourage most people to approach the equity side of giving up ownership in their business.
All right, next question is, can you explain the difference between venture capital firm and private equity firm? Is there an advantage to work with one or the other?
Yes, pretty straightforward. Venture capital firms are generally interested in what most people, they are interested in high growth startups, by and large. There are a few exceptions, okay? The term, when I was trained on it many years ago, the term that I liked best is they are interested in entrepreneurs who have industry creating ideas. So think of when the guys from Google walked in with the idea to create search, okay? An obvious example we've all read about probably is Steve Jobs walked in with the concept of the personal computer. He wasn't the first to come up with that idea, but he was the guy with the commercially viable way to be able to do that. Industry creating ideas, because venture capital firms are willing to make significant investments in startups in the hopes that they grow to be, they are looking for the small business that is going to grow into a substantial mid-size or even large firm. That's venture capital. Private equity, by and large, does not do startup capital. Private equity firms are investment firms, but they are interested in the existing business infrastructure. I spent 2 years of my life selling, trying to attract private equity to a firm that I worked with, and we were successful, but they would not have entertained us had we not already been an existing business. So private equity, by and large, is only interested in the existing small and medium-sized businesses or even large business. Venture capital is interested in startups with industry creating and high growth ideas. That's the difference.
All right, last question is, what are the steps of developing a business plan for a franchise, or do you have an outline to write a business plan for a franchise?
Tell whoever sent that question, I certainly have an outline for a business plan I can share with whoever sent that. You do not need an outline if you are considering a franchise. If it is a good franchise, they will be delivering to you a business plan manual, which is an effective operation and operational manual on how they do it. That's what a franchise is supposed to do. They are supposed to deliver a workable, profitable business model that you invest in and then you establish a position in. So in this case, you don't need a business plan to approach a franchise. You need a concept of what you want to do, and then you want to find the franchise that best fits that vision, and then you engage them. And if they're interested and you are still interested, the franchise will bring to bear a significant business model, a business plan, manuals, all of those sorts of things, as opposed to you having to develop one on your own.
All right, so far that's all the questions.
Fair enough. And we're going to be right on time here. So I wanted to share with the group a couple of things as we prepare to move forward. So these are the resources. For those in the room who will be going through the 10-week course, I wanted you by next week, if you would, to consider this vision description. This is a nice little element that if you can just take a look at it and fill it out, it would help me get an idea of what your aspirations are. So you can see here, it asks you to sort of take a shot at your first year levels of sales, the geography you hope to operate in, and the products or services that you just sort of fill in the blank. I always remind people this is the first step. A vision is the first step in establishing a brand. Bill Holleran's definition of a brand, and there are many good definitions of a brand, is a brand for me is the promise of a customer experience that will give your firm a competitive advantage in the marketplace. As we go through the next few weeks, you'll constantly hear me emphasizing for you to look for differentiation and competitive advantage against any and all competitors. And then if you give me an idea of what your owner's salary expectations are during the first year and your sales goals, this would be a good start to helping us build out a financial template. I thought it was a nice, easy exercise, and there's a week to do it. If you can put that together, then Yasmin or Tiffany or I will send you an SBA 641 form. This is just a form that gives you access to SBDC and Norfolk State resources. The SBDC is partially funded by the Small Business Administration, and they like to keep track of all of the work we do. If you send the 641 form with your statement, I'll be able to look at it. And we have a variety of databases that might help with your marketing research and things like that. And Akosia wanted me to make sure that all of the folks participating in this series got access to that. So I would be able to do that, and I'll come to understand what each of you are trying to do individually. The second thing I thought that was worthwhile is for all of you in the room, some of you may have already done this, but make yourself aware of this entrepreneurial calendar, startwheel.org. It's free. They put out a weekly notice, and it sort of captures everything that is going on in the Hampton Roads market. Probably not everything, but a great deal of things. Pitches, grant programs. There are lots of nifty little stories that are interviewed on a weekly basis. It's just a way for you to be able to immerse yourself into the entrepreneurial community of Hampton Roads, and you'll be able to pick and choose what you may find valuable. And then finally, all of you can communicate with me by Gmail or my phone number. Keep in mind that if you call me on my phone number, you'll likely go to voicemail first, just because I have a contact log that only goes to recognize those. But just leave me a voicemail, and I'll be sure to contact you back, and I can make sure that I deal with the individual needs of each individual participating in the course. So that's the resources and sort of the homework from today's activities for those who want to undertake it at that particular start. We'll start building out a spreadsheet next week, and but having those goals set up, and as I get an understanding of those of you in the room and what you need, I will that will help me provide additional resources and additional guidance, and perhaps additional individuals that might be helpful to you throughout the Norfolk State and SBDC resources that are available. Let's see, and I'm pretty sure that's it. So.